let me know when you want me to share my screen.
Okay, perfect. I will just finish getting the sign-in popped in here. Oops, I think the last time I put the sign in, it smushed together. If you can't get it to work as a hyperlink, then go ahead and copy and paste it into your browser. And if you're still having problems, we do have some problems maybe with, I am not a tech expert, but some techier people than I tell me it has something to do with domains and other foofy things. So if you're having problems accessing the form for the sign-in, just go ahead and put your name, email address, and building in the chat, and we can do it that way. So last hour, if you were with us and with Ben to learn about using technology to celebrate the end of the school year, we had a question about professional learning hours. And so if any of you know Jamie Hale, you need to say thank you. She is phenomenal, and she goes through all of our chats, and she also goes through all of our sign-ins, and she puts out those PD hours via email. And so she's doing all this from home. So if you haven't received yours for a session that you've been involved with us, then please be patient. She's running about a week to 2 weeks behind, but you will get those. We know that this is a renewal year for a lot of you. And so we want to make sure that you get those so that you can renew your license. So thank you so much for your patience. Secondly, before we get started, I want to say Happy Teacher Appreciation Week. This is a unique circumstance that we're celebrating our vocation, our calling as teachers. And so I don't want to let the hour or the week get away from us without saying thank you, and thank you especially during this remote learning period where you are facing unprecedented challenges. So you are doing incredible work. I hope you continue to give yourselves the grace and space to kind of provide some closure to your year and feel good about what you've accomplished, even though it's not how we traditionally would have engaged in learning or ended our year together. So that being said, I am recording for our friends who aren't able to join us right now, but we have a whopping 62 people on the call. I'm so excited. And so I am so happy. This week is all about closure and about celebration, and that's important for us as humans, and it's also important to our students and our families. And so as we think about this and we think about wrapping up our school year in a very unconventional way, what are some things that we need to be thinking about? What are some things that we need to find peace with, maybe that we need to help our students find peace with? And so I'm so honored and very excited to have Kelly Flanagan, Dr. Kelly Flanagan with us. She is the clinical director for Florissa, and she has been involved with a lot of our social emotional work. So some of you have attended our social emotional learning summits. She's been involved with those and is really going to be able to guide us through these conversations this afternoon. So without any other further ado, I'll keep putting the sign in the chat room, but I'm going to turn it over to Kelly, and they are all yours.
Okay, so I'm going to try and share my screen right now. Okay, so I absolutely love speaking with educators. I like doing it in person a whole lot more, I will tell you, because I like to interact with the audience. And let's see, well, you know what, there we go. Okay, so I will try and, I don't know, be as engaging and exciting as possible with not being able to gauge your nonverbals. I was really excited to be able to provide this presentation when Angie asked me, just because I love talking about social emotional content and intricacies of students' mental health. But I know this is a really important topic right now, and so I probably spent way too long putting the presentation together, to be honest with you. So I know that you also have been engaged in a lot of different Zooms and webinars and different trainings. And so I'm thankful that we have so many people here today. So I do worry when I'm speaking with educators about answering questions like this, about what you should be doing or any must-dos in your classroom, because I am not in your shoes. And so what I'm hoping to do today is just give the context for why closure is important and how we think about it psychologically. And this isn't just for your students, it's also for you. And I'm going to focus first on your own closure when we get to that point of the presentation, because how you engage in this process is going to remarkably impact how you help your students do that as well. I also am very aware that we have a large range of grades represented by the educators who are here, and that it's going to look different by who your students are and the developmental level. So what I'm hoping is that as I'm going through the presentation, we can definitely have a time for questions at the end about the context I'm going to provide, but then I'm hoping that you'll also take notes about ideas that pop up for you, or things that you have been doing that you think are working really well, so that you can share from each other's wisdom, and especially across the different grade levels. I think that'll be really important for you all to share. Angie said she can facilitate questions and comments during the presentation, but we definitely can do that towards the end as well. All right. Okay, Angie, go ahead.
We're good.
Okay, good. All right. So what is closure? This is how we think about it in psychology. So it's any interaction, information, or practice that allows a person to feel that a traumatic, upsetting, or confusing life event has been resolved. And just a note, I minimized this little bar over here so that I could see the whole screen just now. So if you can't see the full screen, just minimize the view pane. So I'm going to start with a little bit of art history, because I love art history, and I wanted to put this in, but it actually helps us understand closure. So Gestalt psychology was developed in the 1900s in Austria and Germany, in the early 1900s. And the premise was that we perceive the whole of our experience. We don't see things in fragmented parts. So we will look for patterns and the entirety of an experience to understand what's going on. So if you've heard the phrase, the whole is more than the sum of its parts, that this is what it comes from. And so when we're looking at anything visual, for instance, within art, then we're going to see, we're going to form groups of items that have similar characteristics, and then that will help us to understand the whole. So one of the principles of Gestalt psychology is that of closure. And in closure, it's what we infer what is not there to complete the whole. Okay, so we will be able to see that this bunny rabbit exists, even though it's just little black lines. We can see a man's face, even though the trees don't even touch. Okay, we can see this in just typical logos. So the NBC, I think that's NBC, Peacock, the letters I, B, and M, the World Wildlife Federation. But the idea is that we also are impacted by our previous experience. So whatever we hold in memory, that's what we're also going to take into how we perceive what's going on for us. So if you've not watched Star Wars, you might not know that that's a stormtrooper there. Your eyes won't complete that. You'll think it's kind of an odd figure. So our mind will try to make sense of what we're perceiving. Okay, this happens with visual information. It happens with any kind of sensory stimulation, but it also is what we do when we're trying to make sense of a life event. Okay, so the idea of closure is that we will make sense of our experience through a resolution or an ending to that experience. Okay, and this is really important. We're going to come back to this a lot, because that's quite a large task, is to provide resolution or ending to what we're going through right now. even when we aren't able to, our mind is going to seek that kind of closure, because only by making sense of it and having, you know, seeing things as a whole, are we able to go forward. We can do that in a healthy way or an unhealthy way. In order to make that transition and move on, we need to not dwell in the past and all the things that didn't happen, the regrets, the things that we're missing, and we also can't be anxiously anticipating the future. So instead, we have to focus on and accept our present time. Okay, just whatever the here and now is. And with this definition of closure, and I love this, closure is often something that is comforting or satisfying. It gives us, you know, an idea that we've finalized something. Okay, and with finality, that means the character or condition of being final, settled, and complete. Okay, and this is particularly important following a traumatic event or a loss, which we have in the case of COVID. Okay. So closure is important because the way our mind works is that we're going to try to seek understanding. We have this need for completion. So just as our minds, our visual perception will enclose a visual field for that wholeness, to see that wholeness, we're going to do that with our experience as well. So you can see these random black dots up there in the right corner. That's actually a soccer ball, right? Our mind will complete that. And we are going to do that with our experiences. This is particularly the case, what our minds will do when we feel like things are out of our control. So we want that sense of control, we have that need, and we want to make sense of things. And we need the ending to be satisfying so we can move forward. You know, as educators, this is really important because we typically have closure to the school year. If you think about all the many ways this last month, you have these rhythms and these events that you're usually, engaging in, and that's over the last month, the last week, the last day that you're preparing your students for that ending. I was giving this presentation to my son, and he's like, "Well, I don't know why this closure is important." He's 12, and I got to that point. He's thought about, yeah, that last month you're really gearing towards something to that closure, and we have that anticipation of the ending. That I think that's one of the greatest experiences that we have in our culture, is that academic year, that flow, ebb and flow to what our year feels like. As educators, usually that closure probably makes you feel really good about the year you were just ending. Even if it was a hard year and you had a particularly difficult class, there's that finality, that comforting sense that, okay, I made it through that hard year. And then you make sense of it, you reflect on it, and there is that ending. You are going to be able to get that closure if you can experience the emotions that you're having about it. Okay, so we will need to recognize our emotions and be able to sit with them. And we're going to talk a lot more about that. If you don't, it's kind of like if you tried to put the soccer ball underwater. You kind of push your emotions down and they're going to pop right back up at some point. And that importance of closure for this very weird year that we are ending in gives us a chance to not have those feelings popping up all the time. We really need to be able to have some kind of resolution to what we've experienced. Okay, any questions at this point, Angie?
I don't see any right now in the chat box. I think everybody's just kind of taking all of that in and recognizing that, yeah, I think this is what we're feeling.
All right. And Angie and I were talking at the beginning, when we just got on, about that feelings may be a little raw right now too. And so, I hope maybe even as that you take this hour just to sit and feel some of them as we're talking about what those experiences might be like for you. Okay. All right. So in the case of COVID, okay, we have definitely lost that rhythm of the school year and those routines. And so it does feel like it's kind of an uncertain time. We your students do not have a sense of control. There's a lot of decisions being made without their input. There's a loss of security that many of them find within the school setting. And so there's all these losses. There's a loss of routine, the loss of peers, that socialization. Think about, I mean, I just watch my kids now and they're not getting all those little, 1 minute or 5 minute interactions of, pleasant interaction with their peers, that laughter. They can get on Zooms and do that, but it's not the same, right? They're losing that socialization that's so important for development as well. There's that loss of important adult relationships, and for many of your students, that's what you provide to them. And so, losing those relationships, it's pretty big. And then the loss of important experiences. And I know I can only think about it for like 30 seconds for those kids that were going through a transition. So whether they were going into middle school or graduating from 8th grade, and definitely our seniors, that's a lot of important experiences. I took my kids flying a kite a couple weeks ago at some soccer fields here in Dixon, and my kids seemed to be doing fairly well. And we walked up onto the soccer field, and my 12-year-old just kind of stood there and stared, and he said, "Oh, I really, really am sad that I didn't get to do soccer this year." And I thought, yeah, that's a loss. So, and we're going to experience grief from those losses. And losses can be small. They can be any kind of change. Right. In this case, we have quite a lot of larger losses, and each of your students is experiencing it in some way. But losses could be like, at the smallest level, losing a favorite stuffed animal, or a coach becoming sick and missing the last game of a season. Those are losses. They can also be really big, like the birth of a sibling. So good things, or the move to a new neighborhood. But anything that involves change is a loss, and we need to figure out what we're feeling about those things and find some kind of resolution to that experience. So grief. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And Angie just told me, I think in the last week, she's been feeling like that teachers are really talking about grief as being part of your experience. And grief is a very normal reaction. There's a lot of feelings that will come and go, and so we'll talk about that. But it's the response, just an emotional response to any kind of loss or change. Okay, and that includes of the routines. So I'm sure some of you have heard about these stages of grief, and I'm going to go through it kind of with a sense of how it's impacting your students. Okay, so grief, there's these 5 stages of grief. You may experience some of them more than others. Some of your students may not feel some of them. You can go in one day. I feel like over the course of these last 7 weeks, I've felt 3 of them in one day. And so, it can feel more like a roller coaster because emotions come and they go, right? They will change over time. And so we can go understand this process by, that we've experienced over the last, since March 17th, by understanding the process of grieving. So with denial, that often involves avoidance, confusion, shock, fear. So your students may avoid educational activities. I think this is happening a lot at the high school level, where their parents can't be on top of them all the time about what they're doing. And so there may just be full out avoidance. There may be avoidance of conversations about the change. And just, not wanting to deal with it. Then there's anger, which involves frustration, a lot more irritability, and agitation. Oftentimes anger is just what we see for emotions that are underlying that anger. And so it could be underlying anxiety for a lot of kids. And that can, be for a whole host of reasons, whether it's fear for their, safety, for the health of family members, for what's it going to be like when I go back to school and have to talk with people again, and how's this going to affect my grades and in the future. And so there's a ton of different pieces of anxiety that can then show up as anger, and that will result in misbehavior, some tantrums. In my house, it's a lot of bickering with siblings. There can be regression to earlier developmental stages. So we're working with a lot of families where you're seeing toileting accidents again, or thumb sucking coming back, or things like that. And then difficulty concentrating. So if you're having a hard time getting your students to complete some of the work you've given, this might be the case. Then there's bargaining. I'm sure most parents have heard some kind of bargaining at some point during this time, but it's really just a desire to negotiate a new reality. So they want to make it something that it is not. With depression, you have a lot more of that sense of helplessness. So your students may withdraw, they'll avoid interactions. They may not want to engage in some of the things that they, find fun and they usually enjoy. And there's a lot more physical symptoms at this point too. And then guilt can also be a part of this. Okay. Like I should have said this, or I should have done this prior to the pandemic. Okay, and then acceptance is that security and readjustment. So that really is just coming to terms with this new routine and reality. Okay, I will say that, I, over the course, every time we find out something new, I kind of call it a gut punch, because I feel like I'm accepting what's going on. And then you get a new, executive order or time frame or new information about this virus, and it feels like a gut punch, and all of a sudden you're not at that point of acceptance anymore, and you're at one of these other stages, and that's what we're going to experience. This has been a weird time where it's not just one loss. I think we've found incremental and ongoing changes and losses in our lives, and so you're going to experience these different stages. In presenting or preparing this presentation, I was doing a lot of reading and searching, and there's actually, hopefully in the next month, there's going to be a lot more about closure, but even in educational levels, I didn't find a ton about what to do right now to close out the school year. But as I was reading all these things, I got stuck and I couldn't move. I couldn't keep working on the presentation. I realized I just needed to stop and cry, because going through these different losses and the experiences of you all and the students, it just became too much. And then once you experience that, then you're able to move on to that next level. So then I was able to go ahead and keep working on the presentation, and here we are. But we need to let ourselves go through whatever those feelings are and whatever those different steps are in this cycle. And again, it can change within the day, it can change day by day, but it's okay, whatever it is that your experience is. A lot of how we grieve is dependent on what our context is, what our past experiences are, what we have within our memory, and what our skills and our perceptions are. So again, remember thinking about that visual field. You wouldn't know if that was a stormtrooper if you didn't watch Star Wars ever. The same thing, we're going to experience grief dependent on what our past experiences are as well. Okay, so when we think about this for your students, children are experiencing this loss in many ways. And so without closure, they may feel an increase in sadness, anxiety, those physical symptoms acting out. And I think what is of most concern that I find is, this loss of interest and connection with school. So that that sense of this is important and I feel connected. That Angie and I were talking beforehand about, she'd just been on a call about, worry about what will this do for school culture. Again, we can't have that anticipatory anxiety, but we can try and do things right now that would help our students continue to feel that connection with school. So maybe we can prevent some of the problems in the future. What kids, what all of us do, but what kids definitely do when they're not given information or not given the opportunity to experience closure is they'll fill in the blanks. All right, so they might take an unhealthy perception or a misunderstanding and in a different experience into the next school year, into their connection with school. And so we wouldn't want them to feel negative things and to feel that lack of satisfying closure and comfort by not providing them with some kind of closure to this loss. Instead, we can focus on resilience, and resilience really at the core of it, it just means the ability to overcome difficult situations. That is, internal skills we might have, our own coping abilities, our own personalities, our own ways of getting through things. So if you are a problem solver and a doer, then you're going to fill your days with that, and that's great. Other people will just need space and to sit and think, so we all have our own ways of coping. But when our students don't have those coping skills, then it's also things can contribute in the environment can contribute to resilience. And so hopefully, they can rely on their parents or friends and definitely their teachers to help them understand what's been going on and to overcome this loss. And so if we care about their social emotional learning, then we're going to want to develop their resilience as well. And so they could take relational skills, they could build skills during this time to understand how to end things well, how to maintain relationships when we're far apart. There's so many things we can be learning and developing during this time, as opposed to the loss of skills and the sadness and the bad things that are part of this. And then they can carry those coping skills with them. Okay. Closure will ultimately allow them to move on and tackle new challenges, experience things more positively. So again, we want to keep moving our reflection and our perception of this into a more positive light too, because this is an opportunity. So it's interesting in this pandemic, there's a lot out of our control. And a lot out of your control in terms of what you provide for your students. We don't know what the resolution is going to be. We don't know what the fall is going to even be. It's still either up in the air or we're figuring out a whole bunch of different options, and none of that feels very satisfying. So what we can do is help at least with some sense of finality and completion to the school year and to some kind of finality to your relationship with your students. Okay. And I think, just sort of like I talked about trying to push a soccer ball underwater and it keeps popping up. If you don't have that condition, that definition of closure, that condition of being closed and finding a comforting or satisfying sense of finality, then it's going to be really hard for you to go into that next school year and feel okay about it. Okay. So Angie, any questions that I need to pause for?
No, just some really great feedback about, Debbie commented that, there's a loss of awards at school. And so you have a lot of students who were working toward a goal, and now that is a different situation. Kim commented that I think we're all feeling that roller coaster of emotions, and it's really interesting. And Teresa commented on this one that that grief cycle that you brought up, kind of bouncing back and forth, and really kind of understanding that we could be at acceptance, but then something else happens and it moves us to kind of a different phase. Kind of navigating all that and having a language for that is important.
Yes, great. Oh, good. I'm glad a lot of that's resonating. Okay, and I hope that you're all, you know, having different ideas pop up too, that we can share, because I think, you know, it's nice to feel that common sense of, okay, we're in this together and we are experiencing all those different emotions. So what can we then do? Okay, so that leads us to what can you do? Okay, and we're first going to talk about your own experience. So the first thing you can do is process your own grief experience. What I'm very cognizant about is that you each have many different roles, and so your experience of grief and of loss is probably going to differ across those different roles. So as teacher, as administrator, as a parent, as a mentor to your students, as a coach, if you coach, those are all different roles, and there are different losses involved in those. And so it's, you're having this roller coaster of feelings, but it can also be a roller coaster within each of those different roles as well. When we try to grasp for a false sense of control, or we fight against the situation we're in and the emotions that we can't change the situation, we can't change our emotions, they are occurring, then this often will lead to suffering. So in psychology, we understand when we're fighting against it, it doesn't bode well for us. We need to accept it and then be able to move from there. So right now, we can't change our reality. Okay, so what we can do is really engage in what we call radical acceptance. And that means just accepting things as they are. It doesn't mean that you don't try and seek control of what you can have control over and you just give up. It just means, you know what, we understand what we can and cannot control. I can acknowledge what I'm feeling right now in this present moment. I'm not going to judge it. Whatever I'm feeling is okay, even if it's painful and uncomfortable. You know, that's how I'm feeling right now. By accepting that, it actually helps you to go through that grief experience. Okay. Guilt may be part of that experience. I was talking to some teacher friends and I was surprised because I thought, oh my goodness, you all are doing so much. How can you feel guilty about anything? But we each walk into this situation with, our different experiences. And so I know you're doing what you can right now. Everyone's doing the best they can, and we're all going to be coping with it differently. And it needs to fit what you need right now. It needs to fit with what your students need right now. And then there are limitations just in our context and the technology that's available to us, in the technology available to our students. So the students you're not able to reach out to, you may feel guilt about that. I'd say, recognize that guilt, feel it, and then be able to let go of it, because there is quite a bit that is out of your control, and that you don't. There are just limitations that are present, and that's a reality. And then engaging in self-care, so making time for yourself, prioritizing healthy choices, being realistic and not perfectionistic about things. Like I said, there are limitations, and that's okay. And you're doing the best you can, and it's not going to be perfect. It's a learning experience. If there's ever been a learning experience for education right now, I think this is it. I think there needs to be a ton of reflection about what has worked and what hasn't worked, and that's an okay thing for us right now. You might need to set boundaries on any information or even people who make you feel more anxiety than what you're able to cope with right now, or anger, and that's okay. Boundaries are an okay thing. And then just reconnecting with things that you enjoy. So the hobbies, or wanting to learn something new, that's all wonderful for self-care. And then seeking your own relational support. I think it's amazing to see everything that's been put on by the ROE in different ways that you all can connect. And I'm sure within your buildings and among your educator friends, you've been able to reach out and find that relational support, as well as your support networks that are not within education. I included this picture. This is my daughter. She is 10. And there is a note from her teacher that was placed in our yard. And I absolutely love this because in that note, there was a processing of the grief that her teacher was feeling. There was, a true, honest, I miss you, student. And then there was that connection that, you know, allowed my daughter to actually feel that, you know, to have a mix of emotion. We call this in child psychology, I often refer to like double dip feelings, that you're going to have an ice cream and you're going to have multiple feelings. So there's that sense of missing what you don't have, but also like, oh, I feel good that I'm seen and still remembered, right? And so this was a great coping mechanism that I wanted to give a visual to. Okay. So what can you do? I thought this was a pretty cool exercise. So to look at circles of influence, and I think this was, you know, completed at the beginning of this crisis. So you can directly, it goes through what you can directly influence, what you can indirectly influence, and then what is completely out of your control. So, you know, governor orders, and whether you go back to school or not, that's out of your control. We cannot have, you know, any influence on how graduation or whether graduation can proceed. As usual, is out of your control. Now, how it can be done, maybe you can have indirect influence on, because you can talk to your administrators. Maybe you can directly influence how you end things with those graduating students of yours. Okay. It's important to think about this for yourself, because, you know, we all know children will learn from the models in their lives. And so as with everything that you do as educators, you are teaching and modeling and allowing children to figure out ways that they might find is helpful for them to handle challenges in a positive way. And it's a skill, you know, when we think about social emotional learning, it's a skill that's as important in their lives as reading and writing. And it's definitely worth your time to go through this very difficult emotional process. So what you could have influence on is we think about this as like the 3 R's: reassurance, routines, and then regulation strategies. And those are 3 things that you can be doing you know, in your role with remote teaching right now. And so being able to have routines even for this last part of the school year. And again, if you haven't really had them, it's something to think about. You know, how do you want to develop some kind of routine that fits for you and fits for, you know, what your class is. Create a supportive, secure environment for your students to connect with you still in some way. Provide structure and autonomy over daily tasks. This was really important even in the development of remote learning. And I actually wish it had been talked about a lot more, but we can provide structure, but because kids right now have so little control over things in their lives, it's also really helpful for them to have that autonomy of choosing what it is they want to do daily, or when even to do it. And so I think, you know, if we wind up doing this in the fall, that'd be great to help parents even understand that those routines are great, but let kids sort of have choices in that. And even within what you provide, you know, you might want to give different options that they can then select from. You can stay focused on what is possible, okay, what you do have, you know, influence over, in order to reinforce a sense of control and reassure them that it's okay. You know, it will get better. We will get through this, and they can really decide how do they want to get through it right now. Okay, so just like you're going to make those decisions for yourself, you can really be talking overtly with, okay, how do you decide how you want to tell this story when it's all said and done, about how you got through this. Okay, so again, we're going to model and teach resiliency. So that's how to handle challenges, those difficult things in life that are going to keep cropping up in a positive way, how to engage in problem solving, how to cope with all those really difficult feelings that we're having, and how to be compassionate with themselves and with others. So those are all things that you can either directly or indirectly influence in your roles. Okay, so this is where I start like, oh, I don't know if, these are suggestions, these are what I've found, but again, it's going to differ by grade level and, you know, what is available to you. So when we're thinking about social emotional well-being and that sense of belonging at school, being super important and not to be thrown away even during remote learning, what we know is that from a lot of research in social emotional learning, it's clear that when kids feel safe and in a supportive environment where they're able to have strong relationships built with adults, then they're more engaged learners. And so part of their experience of closure is also being able to recognize and have space to identify and deal with their emotions. And there's all sorts of ways, and it doesn't even have to be shared with you, but you can just put suggestions out there of different activities they can do and to express how they're feeling and what their experience is of here. I know it's always worrisome to put that out there because you might not feel like you know what to say or how to respond. But really, it's to accept and not judge whatever the kids put out there. Like some might just be really angry they didn't get to play, you know, whatever sport it was in the spring for them. And go ahead and validate that and reflect, yeah, that stinks, and understand that. And really listening is much more important than knowing what to say. Okay. Some other ideas, and admittedly, again, from a non-educator, but is to go through and develop, you know, figure out what do you want to do in a mindful way for your own closure. So is it packing up your classroom? And being really aware to do that mindfully, it's to pay attention to each of the tasks. So whether it's going through the desks or taking your bulletin board down or, you know, cleaning out your own desk, do it very mindfully. Be aware of what you're doing and what the feelings are as you're going through that process. Then at that point, or, you know, you can start now, reflect on what you liked about this process and what you've learned from it. We could really focus a lot on those negatives, the things that you guys have not hated. This is not why you came, and, you know, you didn't set out to be remote teachers. So there's definitely going to be the things you don't like, but what is it? What have you learned from this? What practices do you want to take back into the classroom, into actual, you know, face-to-face teaching? And what have you learned from this experience? And we can always change what we're doing. And that's the neat thing, that there's always that next moment and that next day that you can, if you take the time to learn from it, then this might actually be a positive for you. And you can do this with each other too, which I think is pretty cool. A lot of what's written about remote learning during this time right now is how important the use of technology is, not for teaching, but for that sense that there's still a community that students belong to. And I don't think this can be minimized or diminished at all. That sense of, for kids to feel like they still belong. We all want to belong, and especially kids as they're figuring out who they are and what their identity is and who cares about them. That sense of community is really important. So for the students who are able to do it, video conferencing can be really helpful for that. A lot of educators are saying, you know, let's develop a virtual community. So that can be a Facebook page, or, you know, on one of the apps like Seesaw, just to develop a place where you can share videos and pictures and updates and answer questions. And these are all beautiful ways to, again, experience that community, especially for students who might not be able to get onto the technology for video conferencing. You can send personalized messages. You know, a quick postcard for that student that is just breaking your heart, you haven't been able to have contact with during this time. You might not know how it's received. You might not know, you know, you're not getting that response yourself, but it makes a huge difference and impact. So if you're feeling that kind of that burden on your shoulders, I'd say go ahead and send something, reach out in some way so that they know that you're thinking of them. Whatever you're doing in your classroom, you can move to digital. And that's kind of a cool thing. So if you had morning meetings, you can do that digitally. If you, you know, did an end of the week review, you can do that. So whatever those routines are can be moved along. And that all moves it, you know, helps move you and students to feeling like, okay, there was that continuity. And so when we reach, you know, we go through this closure experience, we're moving, we can sense that we're moving towards that. You can schedule and facilitate virtual celebrations. You can organize a goodbye or memory book or slideshow that can be pictures, writing, memories, of different things that happened in the class that year. Shared art projects such as a mosaic, like mailing out different pieces of a a picture that kids are going to complete and send back, and then you take a picture and even have it hanging next year in school when you show up. So these are all different ideas that gives that sense of, okay, what was before has continued, and at the end of the school year it'll feel that's comforting and satisfying sense of closure, and finality will actually be more likely to be experienced. Okay, so now we have a little less than 15 minutes, but just to answer any questions about that context of what may be going on emotionally for students, but also for you all to share some of the creative things that you have been doing or that you thought of during this presentation that may promote that sense of closure. What you may want to talk to colleagues or administrators about as you think of the end of the school year. So Angie, I will turn it over to you, and I can stop sharing my screen if people want to, let's see.
So we have some great sharing going on in the chat, but we also have some very specific, really good questions. So Kristen asks, what kinds of coping skills can we help parents with in working with their children? Are there websites that we could direct to that might address some of these issues? And then the follow-up to that was, Amelia asked, and what about for, teens? Is it differentiated by age group?
Right. So I definitely, younger kids will rely more on their environment to help them with coping because they're still learning and developing this. High schoolers are definitely, we work with a ton of high schoolers, they're still trying to practice and develop those coping skills themselves, and they've experienced those emotions so big right now. I'm really feeling it for high schoolers because so much of, naturally in development, high schoolers have been moving from their family as their major support group over to their peers. And so to have lost that as part of their daily routines and rhythms is a major loss. And so definitely you can help across the age groups. There, Angie, I can send you, we have a list that we've developed of different resources. You can type in, there's Center for Resilience that has great resources. On Facebook, there's a Magic 123 Parenting, and they've been developing this, I think they call it like the coronavirus parenting handbook or something. It's really helpful. Those are for elementary age kids. But even just posting or sending out one quick face sheet and document from these different sites can be really helpful. It's just like sending a newsletter home in a Wednesday packet of some social emotional content, and that can definitely be helped. If a parent's asking, most places, so if you've been in contact with parents who are wanting support, I think almost all the places locally that provide therapy services are continuing to do so remotely. So we all have teletherapy set up, and they can just do it as a consultation to just talk about, to have their feelings and their experiences validated right now, and get some suggestions and problem solving. But Angie, I can send you a list.
Thank you.
Yep.
I think that goes along with the question about the social media sites and some other things. So if there are those resources we can pass along, that would be wonderful. Debbie shared that she sent out videos of the staff, and I saw a lot of those, and we tried to share those on our ROE Facebook page. I love all of the creativity that we're seeing, that you guys are reaching out to your students with videos and special messaging. Shannon talked about sending out personalized letters, and with the personalized letters, sending some sunflower seeds to plant in reflection and celebration of their growth during this year. I love that. Jennifer commented that Ben gave a session last hour about free apps and programs for digital photo graphics and video makers. So maybe some of you are going to be doing that. And then Flat Mrs. Bay, Debbie has her version of Flat Stanley, and the kids are using that for the end of the year to stay connected. So lots of creative ideas out there. What are some other things that you're, you can either put it in the chat or you can unmute yourselves, questions that you have about providing that closure or moving through that either for yourselves or your students, or maybe some things that you're going to try.
Before you do
In
that,
another session, sorry, in another session, we talked about the transitioning from grade level to grade level. So like second grade to third grade, not being able to see their room. So we talked about having a Zoom meeting with next year's teachers. I don't remember what class that was, Angie, that we talked about that with, but also I have a couple special ed students coming to my room next year. So we have an IEP meeting coming up, and then we'll try to do a Zoom that they can talk to me personally, and then I might do it from my classroom so they can see the classroom. So that closure and moving on, transitioning.
I love those ideas. Kelly, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, you know, as you think of these two, I don't think any of the ideas you come up with are bad. You might, in talking with some students, you might think, well, but I wouldn't be able, not all the students would be able to participate from that, in that, or they wouldn't, you know, experience that as something helpful, or do a variety of things, because every student will be, you know, taking something from it in different ways. So.
I know some of you have commented that it's hard because you have 200 families you're working with, or 270 students. So anyone have any suggestions or thoughts on reaching a wide range and number of students? Or is that one of those things, going back to Kelly, I really identified with it when I saw it, that circle, those circles of influence. Perhaps you can't reach all of them, but are there some that you really feel need to be reached?
I wonder if you could just kind of, you know, divvy it out, and if you're departmentalized or something, just break it out where, you know, a group takes 20 kids or 20 families, and another teacher takes another 20 or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Divide and conquer.
Mm-hmm.
You could use your extra support staff too, because we still had our aides coming to help on packet handout days, and we still have ladies working in the lunchroom passing out lunches a couple times a week, so maybe they could all kind of help out too somehow.
Yeah, they're all wanting ways to help. They're asking for ways to help.
Mm-hmm. Anita commented that their 5th grade team in Morrison delivered May Day baskets to their students on May Day, and they divided them up so they only had to deliver 36. Only 36.
Only, right? Yeah.
Only. I think special things like that are not only, you know, I go back to that double dip analogy. I think it makes us feel really good and provides that closure, and then it also helps our students. Other ideas or questions for Kelly?
I told like some other Zoom, I mentioned this, but I am working with another 5th grade teacher, and we're combining our classes. Like we work together, like with they have the same gym time, same recess time, so they know each other pretty well. So we're gonna do a combined Zoom party at the end of the year, and then we're gonna have like a theme, so like everyone can like dress up in like a certain theme and just like play Pictionary with like the Zoom whiteboard, or like just to have them talk to each other and see each other one last time before the end of the school year. So.
I love that. How fun.
That is awesome. Might have to steal that, Shannon.
I would say you could do like a themed like pajama party, but let's take a minute and think about how the pajama thing has totally transformed. It's not a novelty anymore. I think my son's still wearing his pajamas today. Every day.
I think I'm going to burn my daughter's bathrobe. I hate it.
Other questions or ideas? Oh, go ahead, Debbie.
So I just keep thinking of all the classes I've taken. The Zoom party with lunch with a teacher. Like, was it Friday lunches or something? You could do a Zoom party where you eat lunch or you eat breakfast together and then just chit chat. That could be kind of your end of the year celebration. You have a picnic, but your picnic is on Zoom. So maybe something like that where it's not just themed, but maybe tie it in where you're doing something that maybe you would have done out, you know, in the playground area for the last day of school.
I like that idea. My son's chess awards banquet is going to be via Zoom, and so usually they, you know, the season ended in, gosh, what was it, February, but with the shelter in place orders, the awards banquet kept getting postponed and postponed. So we're doing it on Zoom. And so I have this vision of all of us kind of huddled around the computer screen to celebrate the chess awards. So even awards banquets might be, or those special awards that we give to our star readers, or to some other special students, that might be an option too.
My husband's coached soccer since we've moved to Dixon, and he does something at the end of every year called an award. So it's AWORD, and he basically gives a word to each kid that represents who they are and who he experienced them as, and sort of like a benediction for the next, you know, moving forward. So even if, you know, we talk a lot about technology, and I know it's really frustrating to y'all, is you're not connecting with every family. And there's that sense of loss, guilt, whatever you may be experiencing. But even just sending something like that out could be helpful, where you're just giving some words, you're giving an award, you know, to your whatever student you haven't been able to make contact with. That can be helpful.
You know, Kelly, I want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier in that grief cycle. I know, at least in the networking sessions that I've had the pleasure to sit in on and facilitate, one of the things that we've struggled with over the last several weeks is that idea of engagement. And for me, it was kind of a light bulb moment when you talked about, you know, that denial phase as, I'm going to disengage with school because this isn't happening, or this isn't how I typically have defined my school experience. And so that really made me stop and think about maybe why we're not seeing the participation that we are, and even thinking and being future focused about how can we help with that in the future, to help move those kids through that process and be supportive of it. Maybe that's a symptom that we're seeing.
I think so. And I think, you know, whether it's the stage of depression or the stage of anger or denial, I think all of them can be, you know, pushing back or pushing away from engagement right now. I hope you don't give up hope. I have a client I work with who loves school. That's where he gets all his good feels, right? And is completely written off school. Just, I don't care. I know he does. So I know your students, they do care. They will come back from this. And so whatever you know, in your influence can do to let them know that, you know, they care and that you're excited for next year for them. I think that can be helpful and keep them from disconnecting completely.
I think it's important to let them know your true emotions. My second graders, when I do my morning videos or I do my nighttime, I do a read aloud at 7. So many of them have said, you know, this coronavirus scares me. I don't want anyone to get sick. I miss you. Don't leave. And I talk to them and tell them honestly that I've cried, that this upsets me too. And just to make it a safe place for them to share with me and know that I'm in the same boat. I feel the same way. So I think it's important that they know you don't have to put up that strong front right now, because this is so different from anything we've ever done. They need to know how you're feeling too.
This, what Debbie just shared reminds me of one of my favorite authors, Brene Brown. And Brene Brown talks a lot about empathy. And one of the things she also talks about is this idea of vulnerability, and how vulnerability is the pathway to courage. And so I thank all of you for being so vulnerable with us, not only today, but in all of our work together, because it's providing that pathway forward, not only for our our students, but for us as an educational community. So I want to say, it's 2:00 and I want to be respectful of our time. So I want to thank all of you again for all of the wonderful, incredible work that you do. Please, please, please give yourselves that grace and space to feel what you're feeling and to kind of think about what those things are that are in your circle of control or influence. And we also want to thank Dr. Kelly Flanagan for being with us here today. I think this is such an important reminder for all of us as we look to close the school year. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Kelly. And we are looking forward to seeing you for the rest of this week. So have a wonderful rest of the day. Go out there and enjoy some sunshine.
Bye. Thanks for having me. Bye.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. It was wonderful. Appreciate it all. Thanks.